After 40 years, 2 marriages, and a lifetime of rumors, the woman who built an empire on control finally named the one man who shattered it. She's been called everything: rebel, icon, survivor. But when Madonna was asked who the love of her life truly was, her voice broke for the first time. She whispered, "Sean." For years, she refused to talk about him. The marriage that burned bright and ended badly was a chapter she left closed, until she didn't set. This is the story of the only man Madonna ever called the love of her life, and why, after everything, she still does. In the summer of 1984, Madonna was everywhere. Her voice, her image, her defiance, all of it defined a new decade. She was rewriting what fame looked like, refusing to be shaped by anyone but herself. Sean Penn was doing the same in his own world. At 24, he'd already built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most intense young actors, brilliant on screen, unpredictable off it, and impossible to ignore. Their meeting wasn't planned. Penn visited the set of Material Girl, where a mutual friend introduced them. Witnesses later said the air changed the moment they spoke. It wasn't flirtation, it was recognition. 2 people cut from the same restless cloth, both searching for something real in a world that only wanted their performances. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Madonna had dated others, but this was different. Sean didn't treat her like an image. He challenged her, pushed back, argued, and demanded honesty. For a woman surrounded by people who said yes, that defiance pulled her closer. And for Sean, who mistrusted almost everyone, she was the first person who saw through the chaos to the heart beneath it. They moved fast. By August 16, 1985, Madonna's 27th birthday, they stood at the altar in Malibu. Helicopters hovered overhead, reporters filled the cliffs, and the wedding became a global spectacle. The noise was deafening, but behind it was something deeply human. 2 people trying to carve out a private world in a public storm. Those who knew them said the connection was raw, almost combustible. They argued as fiercely as they laughed. She called him the only man who ever matched me. He called her the only woman who ever scared me. It wasn't romance built for comfort. It was collision, passion, and pride. Fame only intensified everything. Each fight made headlines. Each kiss became proof that their love was too wild to last. Still, in the rare quiet moments, the long nights at home, the letters, the unguarded smiles, they found a kind of tenderness that neither could explain. Madonna once wrote in her diary that he was the mirror I didn't want to look into. That mirror reflected everything she hid: her ambition, her fear of being abandoned, her hunger for control. Sean saw it all and refused to flinch, and for a time that honesty kept them bound together. Yet even in the early days, cracks were forming. The same fire that made them magnetic was already beginning to burn them both. Reporters camped outside their home, stories twisted into scandal, and every private disagreement became tabloid currency. Madonna fought to protect their marriage from the glare, but fame was unrelenting. Sean's temper and her independence created a cycle they couldn't escape. Still, through all the chaos, there was love, messy, consuming, unforgettable. Friends later said that when Madonna looked at Sean, it was as if the world disappeared, and when he looked at her, it was the only time he softened. It was the beginning of a story that would define them both, the start of a love too powerful to control and too fragile to survive. The moment the wedding ended, the world began closing in. Reporters camped outside their gates, helicopters circled their home, and every argument became a headline before either of them could calm down. For Madonna and Sean Penn, love had no chance to breathe. He was an actor who hated cameras. She was a performer who lived in front of them. That difference became their daily battlefield. When she stepped on stage, she turned chaos into art. When he saw flashbulbs, he saw intrusion. The very spotlight that built her empire threatened to tear their marriage apart. Inside the walls of their Malibu home, life swung between tenderness and eruption. One night they'd be laughing over dinner, the next plates would break against the walls. They adored each other, yet neither knew how to surrender. Both wanted to be understood. Both refused to be tamed. The tabloids called them the Poison Pens, a nickname that cut deep but wasn't entirely wrong. Every publication chased scandal because it sold. But the truth was quieter. Beneath the shouting, they were two people trying to find peace in a world that demanded noise. Madonna's fame exploded again with True Blue in 1986, a record filled with songs about love and rebellion. One track, Live to Tell, carried a message she refused to explain, though those close to her said it was about him, about the cost of loving someone who saw every flaw and stayed anyway. The lyrics spoke of secrets, forgiveness, and strength. It was her way of communicating when words at home failed. Sean, meanwhile, was fighting his own battles. His reputation as Hollywood's troublemaker grew after clashes with photographers and reporters. What the papers didn't show was the reason: he was protecting her. Every outburst stemmed from frustration that their private lives had been stolen. To Madonna, that protectiveness was love. To the world, it was violence. The stress followed them everywhere. Tours, film sets, red carpets. They couldn't escape the story that surrounded them. When Madonna starred in Shanghai Surprise in 1986, directed by George Harrison's company, she insisted Sean be cast beside her. She thought working together might save what was breaking. Instead, it exposed every wound. The movie flopped, and the headlines mocked them. Behind the scenes, she was exhausted. He was humiliated. Friends later said they rarely saw a couple so passionate, yet so painfully mismatched. Madonna's drive to conquer the world left little space for stillness. Sean's need for quiet clashed with her need to create. They loved each other fiercely, but the rhythm of their lives was never the same beat. By 1988, Madonna had begun writing again. Letters she never sent, diary pages she never showed. She wrote that loving him was like standing in a storm, beautiful and terrifying. The words captured the truth. Neither of them could admit aloud that passion alone couldn't hold back the damage fame was inflicting. Still, whenever they were photographed together, her hand found his. Even at their most divided, there was an invisible thread pulling them back. It wasn't image management, it was muscle memory, the reflex of two people who once believed the world couldn't touch them. As the decade closed, the tension reached its peak. She was preparing a world tour that would redefine pop music. He was turning inward, drawn to independent films far from the tabloids. They were still in love, but they were standing on opposite sides of the same dream. What began as fire had become survival. And in that final year together, both would learn that even the strongest flame eventually consumes the hands that try to hold it. By 1989, the silence between them had become heavier than any argument. The house that once echoed with laughter now felt like a museum of unfinished conversations. Fame hadn't just followed them home, it had moved in. Madonna filed for divorce that January, withdrew it, and then filed again in December. The back and forth told the real story. Neither of them truly wanted to let go, but by the end of that year, it was done. The world called it inevitable. For them, it felt like failure. In public, Madonna appeared untouchable. She released Like a Prayer soon after, an album that blurred faith, pain, and redemption. The songs were layered with confession, though she refused to confirm who they were about. Till Death Do Us Part spoke of love and violence, promises and ruin. The lyrics mirrored the emotions she never discussed in interviews, the ones she turned into art instead of answers. Sean vanished from her orbit completely. He left Los Angeles, took smaller roles, and focused on films far from Hollywood's spotlight. When he spoke about her, it was brief and measured. He never attacked, never denied. He just said he wished her well. Yet friends who knew him best said he carried that marriage like a scar, something that didn't hurt anymore but never quite faded. For Madonna, the years that followed were marked by transformation. She redefined herself with every project: Vogue, Evita, Ray of Light. Each reinvention was power reclaimed, yet behind the confidence was a quieter truth. When she sang about strength, it was often born from survival. The loss of Sean had become part of her foundation, the price of being a woman who loved without limits. In interviews during the 90s, she rarely spoke his name. When asked about her marriages, she would pivot to her work or her children. But in private moments, those close to her said his name still surfaced, not with anger, but with reflection. She had moved on but not away. Years turned into decades. Sean remarried, became a father, and continued acting and directing. Madonna married Guy Ritchie in 2000, built a family, and lived a quieter life for a time. Yet whenever their paths crossed, something unspoken lingered. They would exchange a few words at an event, share a smile, and move on. Polite, distant, but familiar. In 2015, at a charity gala in New York, they reunited publicly for the first time in years. Madonna was on stage, reading from a script, when she stopped and looked at him. "I'm still in love with you," she said, half joking, half serious. The crowd laughed, but Sean didn't. He simply nodded, his smile small but unmistakably real. That moment was more than nostalgia, it was recognition. Two people who had survived fame, failure, and each other, finally able to share the same room without the weight of the past between them. When asked later about her comment, Madonna didn't elaborate. But she didn't deny it either. For someone who'd built her career on control, silence said everything. Decades had passed since their wedding, yet the connection still flickered. Not romantic, not constant, but permanent. The kind of bond that outlasts youth, outlasts anger, and turns into understanding. For the world, their marriage ended long ago. For Madonna, it never really did. It simply changed form. From passion to memory, from pain to peace. And in that space between what was and what remained, she finally understood why she'd always called him the love of her life. The years apart did something that fame never could. They gave Madonna and Sean Penn distance, and with it, perspective. The fire that once burned between them had cooled into something calmer, something grounded in respect. They had both grown older, both bruised by life in different ways, and both finally at peace with what their love had been. By the early 2000s, their paths began to cross again quietly. They would see each other at film premieres, charity events, or backstage after concerts. There were no headlines, no dramatic reunions, just two people who had learned how to exist in the same space without the ghosts of the past controlling the room. When Madonna launched her humanitarian work in Africa, Sean supported her projects privately. When he produced documentaries about justice and human rights, she donated anonymously. They didn't announce it, but their support for each other never disappeared. It simply changed shape. Then came the moment that reignited public fascination. In December 2015, at the Raising Malawi benefit in New York, Madonna stood on stage to auction off jewelry for charity. Sean sat in the audience listening. The room was tense with curiosity, years of gossip and history compressed into one silent glance. And then she said it. "Sean, I love you." The crowd laughed, thinking it was a joke. But she didn't smile. She paused, looked straight at him, and said softly, "Yes, I'm still in love with you." The words hung in the air, heavy, with decades of meaning. He didn't look away. His smile was small, but his eyes gave him away. The same mix of pride and sadness he carried back in 1985. It wasn't a rekindling, and it wasn't a performance. It was closure. After that night, they stayed in touch. Madonna invited him to family gatherings. Sean attended a few. They spoke occasionally by phone. The arguments were gone, replaced by an understanding that only time could build. They both had loved, lost, and lived enough to recognize that the connection they shared was unique. Not because it lasted forever, but because it shaped who they became. Friends close to both said there was no bitterness between them, only affection. Madonna once described him privately as a constant. Sean called her a survivor. In their own ways, they had learned to admire what once frightened them about each other. Madonna's later years were filled with reflection. She began revisiting her own history in documentaries and interviews, finally speaking with honesty about the pain and lessons behind her fame. And though she never devoted long interviews to Sean, his presence always seemed to hover in the background, like a song she never stopped humming, even when no one could hear it. When asked about her marriages, she gave a simple answer: "They all taught me something." But only once, when pressed about her past with Sean, did she let emotion slip through. "He's a good man," she said. "He always was." That was all she needed to say. Their reconciliation was never about romance. It was about recognition that love doesn't always need to be revived to be real. Some stories find their ending not in reunion, but in peace. And for Madonna and Sean Penn, peace was enough. By 67, Madonna had lived several lives in one: pop provocateur, mother, activist, survivor, each era shaped by a different kind of love and a different lesson in endurance. Yet one story, the earliest and most turbulent of all, continued to shadow everything that followed. In her 1991 documentary Madonna, Truth or Dare, filmed during the Blonde Ambition tour, a crew member asked who had been the love of her life. She didn't hesitate. She said one name: Sean. That single word, spoken without irony or defense, captured something she never revisited in depth again. For decades, she avoided elaborating. Whenever the subject of her marriages surfaced, she kept her focus on work or family. She built empires, raised children, and kept moving. But the world never forgot that moment, the admission that behind all the reinventions was a man who had known her before the legend took over. In December 2016, at the Raising Malawi charity gala in New York, Madonna and Sean Penn appeared together publicly for the first time in years. She auctioned memorabilia for her foundation while he bid generously to support it. Their exchange, warm, relaxed, and free of the tension that once defined them, reignited public curiosity. It was the clearest evidence yet that whatever existed between them in the 1980s had transformed, not disappeared. After that night, both continued their separate lives, but there was mutual respect in every sighting, every mention. Madonna described Penn in later interviews as a great actor and a good man. He, in turn, spoke of her as a remarkable artist and remained supportive of her humanitarian work. The bitterness that once surrounded their marriage had faded into something far quieter, two people who had outlasted the chaos and come to understand its meaning. When fans today revisit that clip from Truth or Dare, it feels less like nostalgia and more like context. She had already told the truth then, she simply never took it back. The woman who spent 4 decades redefining power and independence never revised her answer to that question. At 67, as she continues to perform and look back on a career built on resilience, her words from that film still carry weight. They are not a confession of longing, but a record of recognition. Sean Penn represented a time when love and ambition collided, when she was learning what it meant to be seen entirely, flaws and all. Theirs was not a story that lasted, but one that left a mark deep enough to shape the way she understood connection. Fame had magnified everything, including the pain, yet it also ensured the memory would never fade. When she reflects on her past now, there is no need for new declarations. The answer already exists, preserved on film, unchanged by time. Madonna's legacy will always be measured in hits and reinventions, but beneath it runs a human thread, the recognition that love, once real, doesn't require repetition to remain true. Looking back, Madonna's story with Sean Penn is less about romance than revelation. It began as a collision between two unstoppable forces, both young, both uncompromising, both unprepared for the intensity that followed. The marriage didn't survive, but the impact did. Through the years, she learned that love can be destructive and still be formative, that endings can carry as much truth as beginnings. Every reinvention, every performance, every risk she took after that relationship carried a trace of what she learned from it, to face the world without apology, and to keep creating even when it hurts. She never needed to repeat her answer or redefine it. The record already exists in Truth or Dare. She said his name once and never took it back. For Madonna, that was enough. Her confession at 67 isn't about rekindling an old flame. It's about recognizing the person who reflected her strength before anyone else saw it. The love that once burned too bright became a piece of her foundation, not to be revisited, but remembered. Some stories don't end with reunion, they end with understanding. For more emotional stories, check out this video.